It's been 2 days since Donald Trump blindsided the world by announcing that the U.S. should take over the Gaza Strip and relocate the Palestinians living there. It's an idea the Israeli government likes, an idea the rest of the world does not. Well, today the White House is trying to roll back Trump's idea of creating that Riviera of the Middle East. That means no U.S. troops, no U.S. money. Relocation of the Palestinians now will only be temporary. Well, will this ever happen? All of this may have been a trial balloon floated by Trump to get reactions. There's plenty of that.
Is nonsense.
This is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is.
It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing.
It was not meant as a hostile move. It was meant as I think, a very generous move.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza.
Most certainly there's no plan behind this.
He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza.
If there is, it's not a plan that has any connection to reality.
It is unlawful, it is cruel, and I will say it's also a bit absurd.
Well, I'm joined now by Ahmad Jamil Azem. He's a member of the PLO's Palestinian Central Council and a former head of the Strategic Affairs Unit of the Palestinian Prime Minister's Office. Mr. Azem, it's good to have you with us. What was your reaction when you heard President Trump talking about seizing Gaza and creating what he said would be the Riviera of the Middle East?
Actually, two things came to my mind. The first one, that this is telling that history didn't start at the 7th of October. This is a continuity for a long march of ethnic cleansing. It started a long time ago, but now we have the American president joining the plan. The second thing came to my mind that this is actually building on other projects announced or revealed last year, like Jared Kushner plan that was in his speech in Harvard University, February 2024. And there is maybe other more projects of transferring Gaza to an investment project, like, for example, Joseph Pelsman, the professor of Washington Post, who detailed a plan for investing Gaza for 50 years, according to what he is called build, operate, transfer, where Gaza will be transferred for a kind of regional project. And this time I can see that Trump is transforming the universe. It is not only the Palestinian issue. He is demolishing the American government. He is changing the climate international regime, and many things happening on the ground. So I think we are facing a new reality, but it is at the same time it is continuity for an old project of ethnic cleansing in Gaza.
When you say a new reality, is there any reality in which you can see Trump's Gaza idea actually happening and getting off the ground?
No, I actually I don't see anything will happen unless there will be a huge massacre. The Gazans will not leave even under any circumstances. And the Arab world, including Saudi Arabia, who made a very clear position that we are not accepting any new regional deal without a Palestinian state. A Palestinian state must have West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem.
And even if President Trump voiced this idea as a trial balloon, even if some people maybe would say that he had no intent for it ever happening, the fact remains that he has gone public with this idea. It's out there now. What effects do you see this idea having on the Palestinians, Israeli-Palestinian relationships, and the greater Middle East?
For the first moment, it came to my mind that Trump maybe has this as a kind of negotiations tactic. He is having trying to start with a very high price asking for a very high price so Palestinians can accept, make concessions and make. But when I see how Trump is working on different levels in the world, on international organization, and the internal level, I think he is serious and he is really actually thinking that this is possible. Anyway, we have to remember that his ultimate deal that he announced during his first term was also have a very detailed and let me say strange details, but it didn't work. For this time, maybe he thought that by this offering or by having such a plan that he can force Saudi Arabia to accept normalization with Israel, accept a new regional order on the price of walking back from this plan in Gaza. But I more and more reading actually even what his assistants like Steve Witkoff comments, I think it is maybe not really just a balloon. Trump thinks that he can take over Gaza, have the ownership there, and even he wants to he will not send troops, he will not send money, he will not spend money. He wants the Arab countries and maybe EU countries to finance and
Mr. Azem,
protect his project there.
Mr. Azem, what does this make Donald Trump then in your eyes? Is he now an adversary, an enemy of the Palestinian people?
It is not in politics. You don't classify people like this. Actually, Trump is a populist who's, for us, maybe he will do a huge harm for the Palestinian cause. The Palestinians will continue. The Palestinians are 14 million around the world. But at the same time, I think, Trump is not enemy of the Palestinians only. He is the enemy of the international regime. He is the enemy of justice and freedom and self-determination around the world. His plans are not exclusive for Palestine. His plan is much wider than that.
You know, we've heard that Israel's military is preparing for large departures of Palestinians from Gaza. I mean, what is your message to those in Israel who would seize Gaza and also annex the West Bank?
Actually, in the West Bank, the situation is really pressuring, and I don't know how it will continue. The stability will continue there. We have more than 800 checkpoints now in the streets of the West Bank. Settlers' violence is escalating. So for the Israelis, actually, Trump plans inside the United States is not much different to the Netanyahu's government inside Israel. They are even redefining Israel itself. It's not, I believe it is not even the Israel that the pioneers of the Zionist movements, which is the enemy of the Palestinians anyway. But I didn't think any Zionist had the dream of this such a state. Now we have the Israelis must think again and again about what is Netanyahu is doing, not only for the Palestinians, but even for them.
Okay. Ahmad Azem, member of the PLO's Palestinian Central Council. Mr. Azem, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my next guest is Gershon Baskin. He's a writer and peace negotiator. He arranged the release of an Israeli soldier held by Hamas back in 2011. It's good to have you on the program. You know, much of the world apparently was caught off guard by this proposal from Donald Trump. But today we're hearing that the Israeli government has already begun preparing for Palestinians to leave the Gaza Strip. What do you make of that?
Well, there may be Palestinians who would want to leave the Gaza Strip because life there is really hellish. It's impossible to live there. As President Trump said, it's really a demolition site, but it was demolished by Israel. The problem is not the Palestinians who might want to leave Gaza. I mean, Israel has never really let them leave, but there's no host country, as Mohammed Shehada said, willing to accept them, not Egypt or Jordan, even though President Trump said they will accept them. This is not going to happen. These remarks by Trump at his press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu created an enormous amount of uncertainty in the region. But one thing we can be certain of, this proposal of his is not implementable. It won't happen. What it is doing is creating a lot of agitation, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of damage is being done, first and foremost, to the continuation of the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and the fate of the Israeli hostages that we don't know who remain there.
Mr. Best, let me ask you, why do you say that this proposal will not happen? Why?
Because there is no host country that's willing to accept 2.2 million Palestinians from Gaza. None of the Arab world is willing to accept them. They see this as ethnic cleansing. They see it as trying to destroy the Palestinian right to self-determination in a state of their own. There are no other countries. If Trump is so magnanimous about suggesting that other countries accept Palestinian refugees from Gaza, why doesn't he open the doors of the United States to them? The Gazans live along a beautiful coast of the Mediterranean. Why not live on the coast of the new Gulf of America in Florida? If Trump wants this to happen, then he has to take responsibility. And I think it's great if the United States wants to come in and help the reconstruction efforts of Gaza, that all the world needs to help with that, including the state of Israel, because 2 million people are living homeless today in Gaza, and that's an untenable situation.
Yeah. Let me pick up on the ceasefire and the negotiations with that. What do you think this proposal is going to mean for holding the ceasefire together? And I'm also thinking about the Israeli hostages that are still in Hamas' hands.
The key to the ceasefire negotiations for phase 2, we're in the middle of phase 1 right now. Phase 2 negotiations have begun, and the key here is determining who's going to govern Gaza on the day after the war, because phase 2 includes the end of the war and Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, something that Prime Minister Netanyahu refuses to do as long as Hamas is in power. Now, this is the focus of what the president and Netanyahu should have dealt with, together with the Arab neighbors who all are concerned about Hamas continuing to control Gaza, but instead they come up with this wild idea about moving the people of Gaza out. We really need to talk about how we're going to find a credible, legitimate, responsible government for Gaza on the day after this war, because if Hamas continues to be there, there won't be a ceasefire and there won't be any reconstruction.
We heard from some commentators yesterday that President Trump's plan sounds like a typical real estate magnate's plan for any piece of land that right now looks like a demolition site. If we look at the broader picture, though, can this plan tell us anything about Donald Trump's Middle East policy moving forward?
The only thing we can say is that it's not very well thought out. There's been no calculations done. There's no macro planning done. This was an idea that was thrown out a number of years ago by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, when he was an advisor in the White House. And he spoke about the real estate possibilities for the Gaza Strip, thinking in wearing a hat of a real estate mogul, of looking at the possibilities of building a new Dubai or Abu Dhabi there, or Doha, and a small piece of land with a wonderful coast on the Mediterranean shores. Certainly, if there was billions and billions of dollars to invest there, Gaza could be an ideal place. But we have to take care with the reality of the death and the destruction that's taken place over the last year and a half from a war that was started by Hamas. Let's not forget that. But many of the people living in Gaza are completely innocent, and tens of thousands have been killed, over 100,000 wounded, and 2 million people homeless today.
Gershon Baskin, as always, Mr. Baskin, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, my guest now is Varsen Shaheen, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Palestinian National Authority. Madam Minister, it's good to have you with us. Before we talk about geopolitics and the Palestinian Authority, I want to ask you, as a Palestinian, what went through your mind when you heard about U.S. President Trump's proposal that the U.S. take over the Gaza Strip?
Outrage and utter unacceptable displacement of my people who have been suffering for the last 7 decades and more, and have been through an atrocious, brutal, genocidal war in Gaza for the last 15 months. This is just a blatant defiance of international law. It's a condescending attitude. It shows this ideology of hegemony and an expansionist ideology that sees people and geography as objects that can be played with.
How has the Palestinian Authority been reacting to this proposal?
I think that naturally the Palestinian Authority voiced rejection of the proposal, just like it was rejected collectively from all Arab countries, Islamic countries, the countries of the free world. There was a quick response of rejection to the statements.
Is the Palestinian Authority, is it in communication? Is it in contact with the Trump administration? I mean, have you been able to voice your views?
I think our views are made very clear everywhere in the world. Our Arab partners, all Arab and Islamic countries have viewed it voiced it very clearly, and definitely it's reaching the ears of the United States.
We know that Egypt and Jordan, they've been very firm that they will not accept resettlement of citizens from Gaza. Trump has replied to that, and I'm quoting here, "I say they will." I mean, I know you're in Amman, Jordan. How much pressure do you think Jordan and Egypt are under, given that they are among top recipients of American military aid?
I'm sure the U.S. administration will use whatever pressure they can put on related countries. But the response of both Egypt and Jordan was also very clear, and it was very quick. They made it very clear that they are not for any displacement of the Palestinian people, and that the Palestinians of Gaza should remain in Gaza, and they will do whatever it takes to stop such initiatives or acts by the U.S. administration or others.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he has called President Trump's plan remarkable. He praised the president for thinking out of the box. Israel's defense minister has ordered the army to prepare for voluntary departures from the Gaza Strip. How many Palestinians in Gaza do you think would volunteer to leave?
Look, when Netanyahu calls this a remarkable initiative, Netanyahu knows what he's saying, because it is a trend by Israel that when Palestinians are made refugees and they are forced to leave their homeland, Israel will not have them return back. And they are banking on this, that people in Gaza, if they leave, he says that they will be re-invited to come back, but we know what Israel means when we go out. And we will not repeat what was done to us in 1948. We were forced into refuge. And until today, 7 decades after we were made refugees, we have not returned. So any call on refuge is unacceptable.
Madam Minister, you know that there is a fragile ceasefire in Gaza and hopes that a further deal might lead to the release of the remaining Israeli hostages and maybe even a longer-term halt to the fighting. How much does Donald Trump's plan, how much does his plan put that fragile ceasefire in jeopardy?
You are right, because there is fragility of a ceasefire, and there is all the time unpredictability from the Israeli side on complying with any agreement in the past. So statements like those coming out from the U.S. administration and from President Trump himself might greenlight the Israelis to do whatever they think is right. And for the Israelis, what is right, and we have seen it for the last 15 months, is killing more Palestinian civilians. And now on top of it, the calls for the displacement of this devastated population.
When post-war Gaza has been discussed, most previous plans, including from the Biden administration, are reported to have had a governing role for the Palestinian Authority. Would you accept anything less than that?
No, we would not accept anything less than that. The natural development is for the Palestinian Authority to take its role on the part that was severed from the Palestinian Authority about 2 decades ago. And today, the Palestinian Authority is the one that has the political and the legal mandate on occupied Gaza Strip. And it's natural that the Palestinian Authority will shoulder its responsibilities in that occupied part.
Madam Minister, one question before we run out of time. I saw an interview that you gave in November of last year in which you said that you hoped that President Trump would treat the Palestinians in a more balanced way than has been in the past. Would you say that today?
I would still hope for that, because I truly believe that the only way out of this charade is for the whole world, including the United States, to comply with international law and to look at the Palestinians as human beings who deserve to have self-determination and to live in a sovereign Palestinian state as enshrined in international law and as recognized by the United Nations. So, yes, I'm still hopeful, and I think we all need to stand tall behind that initiative and that future that we would all want to see in the Middle East.
Minister Varsen, Shaheen, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Now let's bring in Mohammed Shehada. He is a writer and Gaza analyst with the European Council on Foreign Relations. Now, how likely is it that people from Gaza would voluntarily leave?
Thanks, Gerhard. The idea is practically impossible to implement in the first place. You don't have any host countries willing to take Palestinian refugees and uproot them from their homeland. At the same time, Palestinians in Gaza have consistently showed and expressed their refusal to this idea that is not the birth child of this moment. It's been proposed for Palestinians repeatedly as early as the year 1951. In 53, there was a proposal to resettle 12,000 Gazans in the Sinai Desert. Gazans revolted against the Egyptian occupation in Gaza at the time and managed to thwart that idea. It was proposed again in 67, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. You had an Israeli National Security Council head that was called Giora Island that proposed it in 2004. And he said, quote, Gaza is a concentration camp. We need to annex a major chunk of the Sinai Desert and relocate Palestinians there. It didn't work either. In 2019, a senior Israeli official said that they were actively looking for host countries to take Gazan refugees and migrants, and they were willing to even pay for the transport expenses. It didn't work either. So the idea is unimplementable. There is no willingness on the population's side. There is also no hosting countries in a world that is increasingly hostile towards migrants and refugees.
Now, why do you think then that Donald Trump has made this proposal?
Well, there are three numbers of reasons that can explain this. Number one, it can be a distraction from Trump's tech entrepreneurs that are dismantling the U.S. government at the moment. So he needed a ginormous stunt that would capture the entire world's attention and distract from that. Number two, it is a gift to Netanyahu's coalition to stabilize the coalition. Once Trump talked about this, you had a minister that recently resigned, Itamar Ben-Gvir, one of the most far-right in Israel's history, saying that he's willing to join Netanyahu's coalition again. And number three, it can be a conjured, made-up fictional threat that Trump is inflating and exaggerating to force the Saudis into normalization with Israel and force them to relinquish their demand for a horizon towards a Palestinian statehood or a two-state solution.
Now, you mentioned Saudi Arabia. The country has released a statement saying Riyadh will not recognize Israel without a Palestinian state with its capital in East Jerusalem. That's quite significant, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The timing as well was extraordinary. The Saudis issued that statement at 4 a.m. in the morning. They were literally caught by surprise, awakened at night by this Trump proposal that they rejected categorically on the spot. The Saudis at the moment, they have the Arab Vision Plan that is practically the most implementable realistic pathway forwards, which is premised on ending the war in Gaza, releasing the hostages, establishing a ceasefire, establishing good governance in the Palestinian occupied territories, and then moving towards Arab-Israeli normalization in the entire region in return for a Palestinian state. I think everyone should be in favor of this regional stabilization and peace in the region.
Now, after all this now, how do you see the U.S. role in the Middle East and in the peace process now?
Well, the U.S. is supposed to be a stabilizing force that closes the gaps between different parties and opponents in the Middle East. It's not supposed to have perception of being a completely partisan, biased Israeli ally in the region that is only looking for Israel's interest, no matter how it destroys the rule-based international order. So it is heavily damaging. It's also heavily damaging to the trust in the American role in the Middle East if the U.S. is no longer playing by international law or the rule-based international order or any basic common sense rules and is now redrawing the map in the entire region. It's a very scary time to witness.
Thank you very much. Muhammad Shehada there. Thank you. NDW's Middle East analyst Shani Rozanes joins me now. So, Shani, tentative support for the proposal from Benjamin Netanyahu, condemnation from all Arab states. Does this Trump's proposal have any chance to be implemented?
It doesn't seem like it on the ground, but we've also seen Trump, do things that seem to be inconceivable before. I mean, it's not quite clear how much of details are really standing behind these quite impressive statements by Trump. This grand plan, how much did he really drill down into the nitty-gritty of how it's going to be implemented? It seems like very little work has been done there. And of course, it seems to be impossible right now. But we know that Trump can apply a lot of force. We know he plays very, crazy hand, and maybe he's trying to steer things up. Maybe this would be part of, trying to leverage, negotiations with Saudi Arabia, with anybody else, trying to sort of create a situation that tries to rethink the whole situation again, because it is true that Gaza is basically a ruined country, a part of land. I mean, it's going to be very much hard, and the Palestinians who are coming back to the houses in the last days are realizing that it's extremely hard to live there. Living conditions are very hard. So what do you do? And the problem is, Trump has the end solution, and we know exactly where the situation is now, but we don't really know, or nobody else seems to know, how to get from one end, where we are now, to the end of having, Gaza inhabitable again. And maybe Trump-Wild's plans could steer things up.
Now, even Netanyahu seemed to be, in the press conference, seemed to be slightly taken aback by the suggestions, if you look at his body language. But what do people in Israel, ordinary people in Israel, think about this proposal?
Netanyahu knows very well how complicated is the Middle East, and Trump, I think, comes in with a very real, rational vision, almost like a real estate, mindset of, it's a beautiful piece of land, let's make something out of it. It could have worked in a dream scenario. This is not how things work in the Middle East. And I think when it comes to Israel, there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of trying to understand what the details are. But I think the most important thing is how it is seen and perceived by Netanyahu's coalition partners, the one on the extreme right, the one who keep, being against any proposals that might insinuate Israel might need to give up its intention to go on with the war, or might need to accept Hamas's survival in Gaza. And they hope, that this kind of statements from Trump mean that he understands Netanyahu's political needs, but also understands the need for a real shakeup in the Middle East. And they try to find it as a positive thing. And for Netanyahu, it definitely helps him to keep them in line with his coalition and, strengthen his political position.
I mean, we just heard Mohammed Shehada there. He said, as to why Trump put forward this plan, basically to divert attention from whatever he's doing domestically in the US. But what does this Gaza plan tell us about Trump's administration's Middle East policy?
Well, I think he's going all in. He wants, we were talking about even before his inauguration, trying to go big, hoping for a Nobel Peace Prize, trying to bring the Saudis, trying to create a sort of a brand new dynamics for the whole Middle East with the strong players in the region, something that will shift the dynamics of power in the Middle East in a fundamental way. We also have Iran and their threat, and it talks about the nuclear that's in the background of that. So this is clearly something that he wants to, tackle in a very unorthodox way. Will it work? I don't know. It's too soon to say, but it's definitely a very, very big task that I'm not sure Trump and his people are very much focused on all the details and also all the background connected to that. Where these ideas, meet the players, the important players in the region, the Palestinians, and of course Hamas, who now has very little incentive to give up anything. For now. Why would Hamas agree to any plan that in the end will take him out of the equation?
Very briefly, please, how many Palestinians you reckon would be willing to leave voluntarily, even if they're promised they can come back?
Well, it's hard to say, but the Palestinians are known for their persistence and their, strong connection to the land. And there's also trauma ingrained in Palestinian nationality and existence that comes from displacement again and again. This idea might be rational, but it's not very much connected to the reality of how Palestinians perceive their connection to Gaza and to Palestine in general. I don't know if too many of them will follow. And we know also the technicalities of it are very complicated. In other Arab lands, Palestinians are still considered refugees all over the Middle East. It's not going to be easy anywhere they go.
DW's Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanes. Thank you, Shani.